Okay, we are up with Austin Cameron now. So let's welcome Austin Cameron. He's primarily in the Livewire repository, but he's also in the Alpine repository. He is just a fantastic, awesome guy that uses Livewire and Alpine at his day job, and also does a lot for internals. We've become kind of close friends over the last bit because he's helped out a bunch with the projects. And yeah, did I mention he's an awesome guy? He's one of the nicest people that I
He's
know.
an Austen guy.
He is an Austin guy. He's probably one of the nicest people I know, actually, and he's a fantastic fly fisherman, and I'm a terrible fly fisherman. So he schools me and gives me all sorts of advice. He's like a mountain biker, he's a drone racer, and that's him. And he's got this luscious, beautiful red hair. So how's it going, Austin?
You guys hear me?
Are we there?
We can hear you.
All right. I'm doing great. You know,
Nice. You ready to rumble?
Excited. Yeah, I'm ready to roll. So whenever.
All right. Austin's going to talk.
And get into it.
Austin has like the tallest order in all of Alpine Day, which is creating an accessible and super robust modal. So buckle up. This is going to be crazy. Good luck, Austin.
Thanks. We're going to move quickly, but all the code will be available after. So
Yeah, got to move fast.
yeah.
Boy.
All right. Well, I'll get right into it.
All right.
And share my screen here. All right. Here we go. I'm Austin Cameron, and my talk is titled Building a Better Dialogue. And of course, we're talking about modal dialogues, not the dialogue that you might have when your weird uncle's in town. That's something different. So we'll jump right in. If I can get the slideshow working, here we go. First of all, I want to talk about the definition kind of a modal dialogue versus a non-modal dialogue. A modal dialogue is something like this that pops up over the page. It has like an overlay, and then on top of that, we have our dialogue here. Whereas a non-modal dialogue is more of something like what we would call a pop-up. And everyone loves them. I can make this a little bigger. Everyone loves them, I'm sure. But all right, we've got the definition out of the way. Let's talk about some guidelines for using dialogues. Modal dialogues in particular. First of all, it needs to be mentioned, if you can use the native JavaScript confirm method, do it. It's already accessible. It works well for confirming actions. And if you can get away with using that, absolutely use that. But of course, there are situations when you need a custom dialogue. Maybe you need to style your modal dialogue or any number of other reasons. So I would say that the two best cases to use a modal dialogue are when you need to confirm a dangerous or destructive action, or when you need to you need some sort of immediate user input. So maybe you have a small form with just a couple of fields. That's a great use case for them. Definitely, you want them to support accessibility and keyboard navigation. As far as don'ts, don't use them for giant forms. Don't use them for huge scrolling terms of service agreements that nobody reads. Those are better off on separate pages. Don't use non-modal dialogues. Really try not to use pop-ups. I know the cookie consent pop-ups are pretty invasive in the internet nowadays, but try not to use them if you can get away with that. And don't nest them. It's a weird user experience. Usually it's possible to get it to work, but it comes with its own accessibility concerns too. So I would just avoid nesting them if you can. So I think it's probably time for a real demo. So we'll move over here to my demo, which I built with Alpine, of course. And so we have a little dialogue. Are you super stoked for Alpine 3? I definitely am. So this is a pretty simple dialogue, and we'll just go through how it works, right? We have a basic Alpine component with just X data with an open property set to false by default. And then the three main kind of elements that we need to be aware of here are our trigger button, which is this big green open dialog button that's here. And then we have an overlay here. And then inside that, we have the actual dialogue. Inside that, the overlay, the actual dialogue. The way it works is when you click on it, this is pretty similar to the Alpine, the actual dialogue, the documentation. So when you click on it, the trigger, it sets open to true. And then of course we have X show equals open here, which will show the overlay and the dialogue with inside of it. And yeah, I mean, it works. All the rest of this stuff is just kind of extra for transitions and just to make it look a little nicer. However, our dialogue does have a problem. You'll notice when we open it that we can still scroll the page behind it. And this is a common mistake. Actually, a lot of dialogues across the internet have this problem, but I think it's a little nicer if you kind of disable that background scrolling. So how do we do that? Well, the most common way you'll see it done, I believe, is just applying the overflow hidden CSS property to the body element. So we can kind of, I mean, I'm using Tailwind CSS here and just applying this class, but it's the same thing whether you use an inline style or not. So, of course, we could do that right in line in the spirit of Alpine here. And we just put in a semicolon to kind of have this extra line, if you will, of JavaScript here. So we'll save that and refresh. And now you'll see I can't scroll to see this other content. And that works until, of course, we close the modal and then we can't scroll anymore because we haven't done the opposite, right? So we need to remove that class with a CSS property of overflow hidden when we close the modal. However, in this case, we have, this ability to close it with escape key. We also have the ability to close it if you click away from the dialogue itself. And when I say dialogue in this case, I mean the white card here. So there's a couple of places where we have this kind of open equals false. Sorry about the scrolling. We have this open equals false, right? We have this in 3 places. And I don't know about you, but to me, although it is in the spirit of kind of put everything in here in Alpine, even doing this once is kind of gross, but doing it 3 or 4 more times gets kind of gross. So this is where I would personally break things up into a separate script tag. And we can actually take it a step further and use the X spread directive that Alpine provides to really consolidate a lot of these bindings and logic for our modal overlay into the script, right? So rather than kind of explaining this whole slide, I'll explain it as we go in the code here. I'm going to go down to the bottom. We're going to fold this one. And then I have just a little snippet here that will put in our whole script tag. But let's go through it, right? So we have this, script tag at the bottom of the page with a function called modal in it. And within that, we have our data defined, open with defaulting to false. And then I've added a couple of methods, show and hide, that set the open variable and then add or remove the overflow hidden class like we were just talking about. Finally, we have an overlay object with kind of a bunch of properties. They're actually functions, but these, all you can see correspond to Alpine stuff. So X show, XRef's a little different, so we have to X bind that, and then the transition stuff. So we have the script in place, but now we need to kind of update our template to handle that. So we'll just call the modal function in Xdata, and then let's jump to the overlay, right? This piece, because our part of what we wanted to do is clean up some of this stuff too. And so this is why I was saying X spread can be super useful in cases like this. So X spread equals overlay, and then we can actually delete all of this stuff. Not the class though. We're going to keep that out here, but we can delete all that stuff. And I don't know about you, but I think that's a lot cleaner and it's nice. It's kind of separating our concerns a little bit into this JavaScript stuff, right? So of course, this overlay corresponds to this key here in our data. So that's how you can use X spread. And then finally, our original goal, right, to clean stuff like this up, we'll just call the show function that we made. And then in all the cases where we're hiding the modal, these 3, we'll call the hide function. And of course, those are show and hide here. And then if we save and refresh our dialog demo here, we we'll see that now we cannot scroll the background, which is good. And if we cancel out of it, we can scroll again. So not only did our refactor work, but I think we've cleaned it up a bit, and now we've handled background scrolling. So let's get into some accessibility stuff, which if you're like me, you like to use the keyboard to navigate, and it's just nice to be able to do. And I think it's a consideration that a lot of modal dialogues on the internet don't make. So a lot of dialogues aren't very navigable by keyboard. So how do we do that? What's the kind of goal? The goal would be, we want to, when the dialogue is opened, we want to focus an element inside the dialogue. And when it's closed, we want to focus the triggering element, right? Whatever element opened the dialogue in the first place, we want to put the user's focus back there, kind of where they left off. So to do that, we'll just really, we want to, when we show the dialogue, we will focus something within it. So we'll, in this case, the first focusable element, right? This function just looks at the dialogue and says, these are all the focusable elements within our dialogue. So we're just grabbing the first one in this case. And then we have an xref on the triggering button on this one here, right? We have this xref equals trigger. And so we'll just, we just want to focus this when it's closed. And that's a pretty simple way to do it. So that's kind of the first step here. And I'm going to scroll down to the JS again, and then add this in. Right, so we have our method that gets all the focusable elements, and then you'll notice this method's a little different from the slides, but it's basically this is a little kind of sugar that will allow us to specify exactly what focus element we want it to focus. Otherwise, it'll default to the first focusable element, right? So, and worth mentioning here, the reason we're using next tick, right? Some of you folks may not have seen Alpine's next tick function. And the reason we need to use this is that in JavaScript, if you call .focus on an element and you change the DOM right after, the focus won't actually work. It won't focus that, the element won't be focused anymore. And so next tick allows you to run a callback function that will run after Alpine has finished making its updates to the DOM, the next tick, if you will. So we need to use next tick here to make sure the focus kind of takes properly. And in terms of applying this to our dialogue, we can just call this .setFocus here. And then when we're hiding it, I just pasted this right in from the slide. We just, on the next tick, focus the trigger element again. So if we save and we refresh, we should see now we have our cancel button here focused, right? The first focusable element, and these are actual buttons. And one last thing we can do is if we go up here to our heck yes button in the dialogue, that's this one, we can type xFocus. Remember that extra method I made, xFocus first, or within the setFocus method here, right? We have this xFocus first selector. This is just a little kind of handle that I added. So now when we open the dialogue, it'll actually focus this. And this is if you want to specify, if you've got a form or something, it's going to be like the first form element, the first input that you want to focus. And then of course, when we close it, this is focused once again. So that's not technically accessibility, but it ties into it. And the next thing we'll want to do is some actual accessibility stuff. We want to identify our modal as a dialogue with the role equals dialogue attribute. And then we also want to label it using aria labeled by. So doing this, I mean, pretty straightforward stuff. The benefit of doing this is when the dialogue is opened and when something inside of it is focused, like we just did, if you have an aria labeled by and this role equals dialogue, a screen reader is going to announce the label, this stuff, when the dialogue is opened and focused. So that's what I was saying, focus state kind of plays into that. And really applying this to our modal is simple as you might imagine. It's just role equals dialogue, and then aria labeled by, and we'll just call it the label. And this should correspond to an ID, right? So in this case, we'll just wrap this element in the label, right? ID equals the label. And so that's kind of the bare bones labeling. And now we have the labeling and the focus states. Let's talk about something that's a little trickier, which is focus trapping. It's called focus trapping, right? So we want to be able to, and actually let me demonstrate real quick. If we refresh our page here and I open the dialog and then I hit Shift Tab once and twice, you can see it will still focus this button, our original trigger button, even though it's behind the overlay. Now that shouldn't happen. Focus trapping is something that many modal dialogues across the internet they don't consider that at all. But it's something you should consider, because being able to navigate this stuff properly, I'm sure you folks might have encountered one of these dialogues before and you hit tab too many times and you're like, where's my cursor now? So not only does it help accessibility, but it is useful to just keyboard navigation in general. So we kind of have two goals. We want to trap the focus state in the dialogue. And then for accessibility purposes, content behind the overlay should be hidden from assistive technologies like screen readers. Now, the question becomes, how do we handle that? And there's a couple of strategies you might think of, like maybe the tab index property, or listening for tab or shift tab key presses. Those solutions can work, but they're kind of a pain and they have some problems of their own. So what I would recommend, though, there's a better solution, which is called the inert property or HTML attribute. Now, this is a newly proposed attribute, which does not have modern browser support yet, but it's easy to add a polyfill for it. It's a small polyfill, and for what it gives you, it's well worth including. And the way that it works is you have inert on the dialog, inert on any element, and that makes this element and any of its children, it makes it so that you can't use the mouse or keyboard to interact with them, and it hides the content from screen readers too. So you can see I can't select this text, I can't click this button, and all this content will be hidden from screen readers, which is what we want. The question becomes, how do we apply this inert attribute to the dialogue? Well, the general strategy would be we want to make all of the non-dialogue stuff inert when we open the dialogue, and then reverse that when we close it. And again, a couple of ways you could do this, but probably the most effective way is to walk up the DOM from the dialogue itself, and then make at each level the siblings of the dialogue all the way up inert, right? We can't make the parents of it because then inert, because then it won't, then we can't use anything in the dialogue. So how this works is, we loop through the elements starting with the dialogue, and we skip anything guarding, as Hugo called it. We skip anything that's like the document body or doesn't have a parent element. And then this whole chunk here is just a sneaky way to grab the sibling elements of something. We're grabbing the parent, then getting its children, including our current element here, EL, and then we just filter out the one that is our element, right? So anything that isn't our element is what we want, and that's all of the siblings. And then you simply just toggle the inert property with JavaScript, right? And this toState comes from here, and that's just so we can use it for toggling on and off. And in terms of applying this to our dialogue, it should be pretty simple. We just need to, I'll go down here to the script, and we'll just paste this directly in from the slide. So there's one other thing we need to do. We need to open up the head tag here and add the polyfill for this inert attribute, right? So we've got the polyfill, we've got the function. Now we just need to apply the function. And it's just this dot toggle siblings inert, and we'll pass in true. So when we show it, we want to make all the siblings to the dialogue inert. And when we hide it, we want to make them accessible again by toggling inert to false. And accessible in this case, I meant to say interactive. Anyway, so let's refresh and take a look at this and see if it works, right? So now if I hit Shift Tab once and twice, you'll notice this isn't focused. And if I keep hitting Shift Tab, you can kind of see like I'm now up here in the address bar of the browser, which is what we want. We don't want to prevent people from using the keyboard to navigate other native browser controls. And just to prove the point here, which if Firefox could zoom the code, I would make it a little bigger, but it doesn't seem to be working well. But if we look at our button, right, our trigger button here, now when the modals open, we have aria hidden equals true, this is what will hide it from screen readers here. And then tab index is -1, which will prevent it from being accessed with the keyboard. And that's all due to this inert polyfill, right? So it kind of does that stuff automatically. And doing this and making them inert, not only does it trap the focus inside the dialog well, but it's super helpful for screen reader users because it does that aria hidden application as well to everything behind the overlay. And with that, I think I'm out of time. So thanks for watching the talk. Thanks to Caleb and Daniel for putting this whole thing on. And you can find me on Twitter at AustenCam if you have questions, and I'll post the code link and all the slides there later. So thanks.
Sick. Austen Cameron. Nice work, buddy.
Hey,
awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Killer. Totally killer. Super solid content. Crazy what goes into making modals accessible. But it's one of those things that like everybody makes modals. You got to know it. And
we didn't even get into events and triggering it from outside. Or there's a lot of other stuff. But
next Alpine day.
Yeah, next Alpine day, right. Thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of the talks,
Austin.
everyone.
Yep.